What's up? I'm Alex, the entrepreneur. I'm very happy today to bring you a 2-hour completely free React training that I made for you. This is going to be extremely fast paced. It's going to be exercise based. You're not going to get bored. And most importantly, at the end of this course, you'll know what you need to learn more. And also you're going to be competent in using React. We're going to be building projects. You're going to start and you're going to be so surprised by how fast we're going to build this first one. This is a quick quote machine in which you click on it and you get a random quote. It's going to be super fast. You're going to be building this in the next 15 minutes. Then after that, I'm going to show you how to use components to basically show articles in a potential blog that you can build. Next, we're going to be building a timer application where you can add a timer and then you can set how long it will last, and then it will run a countdown, and when it reaches to 0, it will tell you which clock also ran out. And this is going to show you the superpowers that React comes with. And the next thing we're going to do after that is going to be our culminating project in which you're going to be building a blog. In the data that you'll be fetching will be fetched from a live API. So you're going to learn how to interact with the web by using React to build actual blogs, actual products that you can actually use in the real world. So the reason why you should listen to me is I'm Alex, the entrepreneur. I've taught 444 sessions in the last 6 months. I have 7 years of experience. Every person I work with gives me a great review. I've also launched a course called the Complete Strapi Course in case you want to go deeper with working with the tools in which we go through here. But anyway, I've taught this course for free. I want you to really get ready. I want you to learn a lot, and let me know how it goes in the comments, and have an awesome day. So we're gonna get our code editor, it's in the form of Visual Studio Code. Just search for code.visualstudio.com or type Visual Studio Code download, and you'll end up in a page like this. Just click this button and you're gonna download it. And the other thing we need to download is Node.js. Again, just click this button. I would recommend the LTS because it's less of a hassle to work with. Just download the LTS version and it's gonna self-install. And basically you're ready if you can open a window for your terminal or your CMD, and you're gonna be able to type Node and you'll see that something happens. Specifically, you are in a JavaScript environment. So if you type node-v, you're going to see the version of Node, and if you type npm-v, you're going to see the version of npm. And npm is a tool that we're going to use just to download React, so it's actually going to be very rapid. So at this point, once you downloaded those, we can get started. First thing I'll do is I'll open Visual Studio, which is an amazing tool. I've recently switched to Visual Studio from Atom. I would recommend you use this. Honestly, because everybody's using it, and the second reason is because they keep updating it, so it's more recent and simply easier to use. So we're gonna navigate to a folder, and we're just gonna create a new folder. No need to do it with a terminal. I don't want to complicate this, and we're just gonna basically we're gonna create our workspace. Let's call it React workspace, and then navigate to it by using CD, or you can just you may have a way to open your terminal in that folder. Otherwise, you can do what our mere mortals do, which is we ls to see what's up, and then we cd, and then cd into the folder by tabbing to autocomplete that. And then you can go into React Workspace, and then I'll install React by typing npx create -react-app, and then the name of the app. And this first app, we're just gonna call it quote machine, because our first app is gonna be a quote machine that's gonna show you a bunch of quotes. So at this point, the installation process will run, and I'm gonna see you on the other side of the install process. Once the installation is done, you can look in your terminal and you'll see literally what you have to do, which is cd into quote-machine, which is the name of our project. And then since I have yarn, which is another package, it tells me to use yarn, but you may have to type npm start. So just type npm start, and what's going to happen is that the React development environment is going to set itself up for you, and it's going to open your application. It's literally also going to open the browser for you, so it's going to be as simple as possible, and you're going to find your newly installed application at localhost 3000. So at this point, you already have a React application, and we're gonna be able to work with this. So we're gonna use Visual Studio Code. I'll press Command O. You can use Control O on Windows to open a folder. I'll select the folder called React Workspace Quote Machine, and I'll open up Quote Machine. So at this point we have our application, and if you see that everything is green here, it's because I'm using source control, which is a way to track changes by using Git. I guess I've introduced the topic, so I can just show you what literally the top 4 commands work with Git. You can type git status to check what's going on, and in this case it actually shows me that we don't have Git in here. But basically I can tap git init to initialize my source control to track it. Then I can tap git add dot to add everything on my source control, and lastly I can tap git commit -m to specify that I'm gonna commit my changes and add a message. So this is the first commit, and then I press enter, and now my code, if I reopen it, will not be green anymore. It will actually be without a color, and that's because, so I guess it's gonna be, yeah, there's not gonna be the green color, and that's because the changes have been committed. And at this point, every time I change a file, so if I add like a line here and I save, it will change color to orange to show me that it has been edited, or it may show as green in whenever I create a new file. So now you know why the weird colors are gonna happen. At this point, we have a bunch of files, so let's get ready to dive into the React application. Basically, we have a bunch of folders. One folder is called Node Modules. This is stuff that somebody else done for us. So this is the miracle of working with the open source community. It's literally that you have literally hundreds of dependencies that somebody else wrote for you, and that way you don't even need to know what they are. But I have to acknowledge the fact that you know, we're standing on the shoulder of giants. Then we have a public folder, which basically has to do with what the client will see. So whenever your clients or visitors of your website will visit your website, they will see stuff that comes from the public folder. So that's kind of what it has to do. Specifically, you have a file called index.html, which has a div ID root here, which the React application will attach itself here so that it will then be able to render everything. And so, for example, if you need to add some dependencies such as a font or maybe some style sheet, you can add it up here in the head part of your index.html. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just trying to be thorough without overwhelming you, so don't get too concerned with that. Now we open the src folder, which is the truly important folder. The src folder contains a bunch of files. Most files end up with a .js extension because they are JavaScript files, which means that they run scripts, they run code. So we have our index.js, which basically initializes React. That's basically what it does here. It imports React on line 1, then it imports React DOM, which is a library that is used to interact between React, which is just a bunch of JavaScript, and React, and the DOM, which is a bunch of HTML plus JavaScript plus CSS. And then we have an import for the CSS file. Lastly, we have an import for app, which is a component, which I'm going to get to in a second. But basically, React DOM calls this method here, React DOM.render. The first one is an element, which is we're going to get to in a second. But then the second one is the HTML DOM element, which is the element called root, which is the element I showed you before in index.html. So basically, this is an initialization file. You probably could have lived your life without knowing why this does this. Literally, you could just forget everything that I said, but it may be helpful for you to know that index.js is the file in which we initialize React, while app.js is typically the first file in which we do things. So at this point, you can see that the application is just this rotating disk with a bunch of text, and it literally tells you edit src/app.js and save to reload. And what you can see is that I'm into app.js, and now I'm going to just cut out everything beside the div of class name app, and I'll say hello from the other side. I'm not sure if it's separated, but you know, you can get the reference. So now, as you can see, the second I change this file, this application changes, and it changes dynamically, as in every time I change it and save, it refreshes and it changes. So this is beautiful. This is like we're literally set up for success by the npx create React app. That's why I suggest you using it. But This leads to the question as to what's actually going on. So let's get a little deeper into what this function app actually is. So we got this app component. Component is a new keyword that I'm introducing, but basically we have this function called app, which has a return statement, and it returns a piece of HTML, and then it returns a piece of text, and then it is export defaulted. And something that you may have noticed is that in the file called index.js, we are actually importing something called app from ./app. And if I were to change this to app.js and save, the code will still run in the same way. That's because a file called app or app.js, a file called app is equivalent to a file called app.js. That's because we're working in a JavaScript environment, and so the extension .js is implied, while any other extension such as CSS may not. You have to explicitly say that you want to import a CSS file, but you don't have to explicitly say that you need to import a JavaScript file because it's quote-unquote obvious. Like the application gets it for you. They know. It's implied more than obvious. Okay, so now we see this function app, and again we see this return statement. What does it mean? It means that we're returning, and return is a keyword that comes from functions, but basically we're returning some JavaScript, or rather we're returning some HTML that looks something that looks like HTML, but it's actually HTML with superpowers. And the simple demo I can give you will be to add a paragraph. This is a paragraph, and save. And when I save, we're gonna see the second paragraph here. But then something I can do, and I can duplicate it with Option Shift and down arrow. That's how you duplicate lines in the Mac version of Visual Studio Code. But something I can do now is I could, for example, add some math, and clearly it's gonna be 2 plus 2, right? And I can save. And you would expect to see 2 plus 2, but what you actually end up seeing is 4. The reason why you see that is because everything put inside curly braces will be evaluated. More specifically, whenever you use a function app, which again I'm calling component, and I'm gonna explain to you what a component is slowly over this tutorial, but basically whenever you add some curly braces inside of your return statement in what looks like some sort of HTML, instead of getting the normal values, which would be something like this, 2 plus 2, colon, curly braces 2 plus 2, you actually get the evaluated value, where evaluated means evaluated on a JavaScript level. So if I were to open a console here with Command Option I, and I like this fractal style of Windows. Let me know what you think in the comments if you like the fractal style. Hopefully I didn't leak all of my passwords there. Anyway, we have a console. What if I type 2 plus 2? Boom, I get 4. That's because whatever you put in curly braces is the equivalent of whatever you will type in the console. So if I type as plus the secret, or rather if I type the bird plus in a space, because I know is the word, boom, I actually get that. So what if I do the same thing here? I could type another paragraph just for the sake of formatting, and then curly braces, boom, the bird plus is the word, and I get the bird is the word as a single word. So now if I type something like a number plus is the word, I'm gonna get 1 is the word. And if you were to do that in the console, you will literally get the same result. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that this right here, on lines 7 to 18, is called JSX. And for the purposes of this tutorial, this is basically HTML with superpowers, specifically with the superpower of having JavaScript evaluation embedded into it. And whenever you want to embed some JavaScript, you just surround it with curly braces. And thanks to this superpower, we're going to be able to go from this very basic text to something way cooler in a matter of minutes. So get ready, because we're going to be building a quote machine in what I would estimate less than 15 minutes. The first project you're going to be building is a nice quote machine. Basically, we're going to show you a quote, and whenever we click on it, we're going to change it. And get ready, because you're going to be surprised how fast we're going to be building this. How to build a quote machine, we're going to actually get started by using the console down here on the left. So again, if you don't know how to open the console, on the Mac you can type Command Option I. On Windows you should be able to do it with Control Shift J, or you can just right click up here, More Tools, developer tools. And if you're not using either Mozilla or Chrome, then you're gonna have to search for that because 99% of the world uses this. So you gotta catch up, man. Unless you use Brave, in which case I respect you. But that said, we have our console, and we're gonna build a quote machine. So something we could do would be have a list of quotes. So we can type quotes, right? Let me zoom in for you. So we can have our quotes up here. Quotes equals to square bracket in the jungle. Then we're no strangers to love. And then we can have the best one, which is we could all use a little change. And this one is only for the true connoisseur of memory. But basically we have 3 quotes, and the way to access one quote will be to type the square bracket notation and then use the index, which will go from 0 to 2. So if I use quote 2, I will get we could all use a little change. And if I do quote 1, I get we're no stranger to love, etc., etc. So what if we we created a function, or rather, what if we wanted to show this up here? Something we could do would be to delete everything and just have our div class name app. And whenever I lose something, I can just press command up arrow to get it back. And now we have our quotes. And maybe I can save my quotes up here. And I'm going to use the declaration const, because that means that I'm declaring a variable that will not change, just like a constant. And it's a very good habit to do that when you're writing real code, which is here on the right. I'm committing the code to paper, just like I would write with a pen on paper. While when I'm here in the console, I'm just playing around. So to use const here, and then would basically make your life very miserable, because the time you make a mistake, you're gonna have to refresh the browser. So this is something you'll see me do. But every time I'm here, I'm committing to, quote unquote, committing to a file, I'm gonna use const or let, and I'll show you when. But at this point, we're gonna have our quotes. So let's just copy them. No reason to rewrite. Or actually, I don't wanna look lazy, you know, I need to look cool for the tutorial. So in the jungle, boom, we're no strangers to love. And lastly, we could all use a little change. So now we have our quotes. And now what if we simply wrote quotes square bracket 0? Well, this will simply show the text quotes square bracket 0, because as you remember, and you should pause here and complete that sentence on the right. It will be a great idea for you. Will be very good, very helpful. But anyway, if we add our curly braces, instead of seeing the text, we're actually going to evaluate this. And since we declare a variable up here, and we type quote square bracket 0, we're going to be getting this text in the jungle. So now let's save, and let's see what we get. We literally get the text in the jungle. So now if I change this from that to 1, from 0 to 1, I actually get we're no strangers to love. So what does it mean? It means that our JSX is able to run just like JavaScript and evaluate the information that we give you. So that means that to build our quote machine, we have our quotes. The only next thing we need to have would be some sort of way to dynamically change this number. So let's try and figure that in the next video. All right, how do we figure out a way to get some sort of counter to change? I'll show you the fastest, simplest way possible, and you're gonna love it. This is literally why JavaScript is so cool. So the only change I'm gonna make is that instead of having this number here, I'm just gonna put it here. So I'm gonna call it counter. Counter is equal to true, and I'm gonna put it here. And just because I know that the counter will go over, and I don't want you to deal with exceptions, I'm just gonna have you trust me. I'm just gonna put a module operator here, and I'll type quotes dot length. That's because counters quotes dot length. So what we can do would be to just show you in the left. We can put our quotes here, and then we can type counter ba 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 ba, and counter is not defined. But now I can type counter equal to 22, and then I can type counter quotes dot length. It will actually be back to 1. And if I type counter set to 23, or I type counter plus plus, and I run again the counter quotes, I'm gonna get 2. And then if I counter plus plus again, I'm gonna get 0. That's because the module operator will return the remainder of the integer division between counter and quotes. And basically it means that it limits the number to being 0, 1, or 2, so that we don't get some nasty exception that would totally be a bummer. So at this point we have our counter, so we can have counter set to 2. I can save, and we still get, we could all use a little change, which is here. So the next thing is to make it so that we can change the counter. What if I told you that there's a secret way that I'm gonna tell you, just like I taught thousands of other people, but it's secret, you know, because we're the secret ninjas of coding. So what if I told you that there's a method called onClick, which receives a parameter of event, and then I can print out this event here. And this may look a little overwhelming, but you're gonna have to do it 1,000 times, so don't worry about it. So now that I wrote this, when I wrote onClick equals to curly braces, open parentheses event, arrow function, console.log event, and by the way, this is an arrow function, or it's basically an anonymous arrow function that we just put there because it's gonna run for us. But basically, whenever I click on the div now, if you look here on the left, you'll see a console.log statement. That means that whenever I click, I'm gonna be able to do something. So what if I changed counter here and added it? Well, this will actually not work. So this will not work. So it's gonna be a bummer, but it's not gonna be that bad. The reason why this doesn't work is because we're assigning to a constant. So technically we could do let counter, but even this shouldn't work. I'm actually really curious. Yeah, it will not work. And the reason why it will not work is because this function or this component is basically unaware of the fact that the counter has changed. So to avoid this and to do it properly, we're just gonna have to use a new little semantic sugar, which is called a hook, and specifically a hook called useState. We can get that up here by tapping comma, space, curly braces, useState. And useState basically will keep track of a value, and then it will update the component whenever this changes. So what I can do here is I can declare const curly braces counter, comma space, set counter is equal to useState with the number 2, which would be the default number. And basically I just declare this variable counter again, and so nothing will change here on the left. However, we're not going to be able to run this function anymore, counter plus plus. Instead, we're going to have to use set counter, which is a method that allows us to update the value. So we can type set counter, counter plus 1. So we're going to basically be changing our counter like that. And at this point, if we just click, we're going to be able to wrap around all of our quotes. So we effectively were able to build a quote machine in probably less than 10 minutes. Just for the sake of having you bragged about the fact that you built this entire thing, I actually want to make it look a little nicer. We can see that this file called app.js is importing a file called app.css, which means that we can go in app.css and we can basically change these variables. This is basically CSS, it's just stylings. And so what we could do would be to select this class name.app, and then perhaps we can increase the font size to 50 pixels, or rather 42, because that's always the answer. Nice, and we can also maybe set the font weight to, let's do bold, so that it feels a little bit, doesn't feel that bold, to be fair. Let's try putting a 700. Now 700 is bold. Let's try 800, which is bolder. Still doesn't look like it changed that much. And the next thing we want to do, I'll show you something real cool that you can do, will be to go on Google Fonts. So you can type Google Fonts, and you can pick whichever font you like. I'm going to pick whichever font I like, but you can literally choose any of these, whichever you think looks cooler. I think I'll go with Poppins. And I can download a specific size, so for example extra bold, which I think looks real cool. And then actually I'll use the italic, I think that looks fine. So I'll select this style, and then I can click up here on embed, and I'm gonna be able to get a link which I can put, I'll show you where. I'm gonna take the link, I'm gonna go in Visual Studio, I'm gonna go in the public folder, index.html, and then up here above below the title but inside of the head, I'm gonna paste that code, which will basically include my font. You can choose whichever font you want. You just have to select it and then copy from the embed section. And then I'm gonna take this rule down here, the rule for the style, and I'm gonna put it in app.css.app so that the app class will have the Poppins font. So now it looks cooler, and the last thing we can do will be to vertically center it. This is gonna be a little more complicated, but that's okay. So I'm gonna take this ID of root, and I'll go up here in the .app, and I'll type hashtag root, and I'll type min height 100% viewport height, which is VH. So that means that it's gonna always have a minimum height of the size of the browser, of the visitor. And then we can have it display flex, which is magic basically. And then we can set app to have a flex of 1 and a align self of center. And by doing that, our text will always be vertically centered. So now we have this cool effect of having our quote in the center. And if you want to take this one step further, you could put like a nice background video with all the quotes. So this could be from All Star by Smash Mouth. This will be from In the Jungle is Mighty Jungle. I don't really know the name of the song. And then this one will be from Never Gonna Give You Up. Just like I'm never gonna give you up, you're never gonna give me up. So in the next video, we're gonna be building something cooler. In these few videos, we're gonna be building an article component that basically allows to show a header, an image, and the content. And I'm gonna be showing you the beauty of React, which allows us to define it once and then use it as many times as we want. So get ready. In this section, you're gonna truly experience the power of React, specifically because we're gonna be building a simple tool in which we're going to show you a bunch of articles, and this is going to be like some sort of skeleton or starting point for a blog. If you're interested in actually building a blog or even an e-commerce, I would recommend checking into Gatsby. And basically, once you know React, you're going to be able to use Gatsby to build static sites. And I also teach a tool called Strappy that basically allows you to build a backend in a matter of seconds. So if you're trying to learn your front end, your React, then you don't want to get overwhelmed by learning Node.js as well, although I will highly recommend that as well. But if you want to get to the stepping stone, then you can definitely look into a headless CMS, and I happen to teach Strappy, which I think is brilliant. So you can check out the Complete Strapi Course, which is actually 18 hours of coding, and specific, it's very project focused. So if you look down here, you'll see that we have a bunch of projects in which we're going to build an inventory stock management app in just less an hour 20 minutes. Then you're going to be building user login and handle JWT tokens, and this is the new killer update that I just released, in which you're going to be building a blog with Gatsby in a little over an hour, and then you're also going to be building an actual e-commerce with Gatsby, Strappy, and Stripe in over 5 hours. And so this is going to be extremely in-depth, in which you truly build honestly a commerce ready e-commerce. So definitely check that out if you want to go deeper. But I believe this next 5 minutes are going to blow your mind if this is the first time we work with React. So let's get started. First things first, we're going to open a new window, and we're going to have you navigate to your workspace, and let's install a new entry for React. So npx create -react-app, and this one we're going to call it semi-blog, because it's not truly going to be a blog, but it's going to be something really nice that it's going to blow your mind. So I'll see you after the install. Let's cd into semi-blog, and then npm start. It's gonna, if you already have a running process, it's gonna tell you whether you want to run it somewhere else, and say yes. It's gonna open. React will automatically open your application, and you should open it at localhost 3000, 3001, or 3002. If you want to open your code, you can open Visual Studio, then Command-O or Control-O on semi-blog, and we're going to get started. Now the beauty of what we're going to do is that we're going to be building one article component, and then I'm going to show you basically the React magic that allows us to have as many React components as we want. So I'm going to go in app.js, and I'm going to delete all of this code. And then I'm going to put what I call a component called article. And a component is simply a tag, just like an HTML tag, that is a custom tag that is mapped to a function. So if I type this, or if you type that, you see that article is not defined. The next thing I'll do up here is I'll type import article from /article surrounded by single quotes, and this will tell me that there's no file, and that's true. So I'll right click on src, new file, article.js, and in article.js I'll just import React from React, and then I'll say const article, which basically I'll declare a function in which I have a return statement, and I return a div that says article. And then the last thing I'll do at the bottom of the file will be export default article. And this is something you're going to be doing quite a lot. So the next thing I can do in Update.js is that if I duplicate the article, you'll see more than one. So that's really cool. And what we can do for an article will be to show a title around a h1, so title, and then we can have a paragraph in which we can show the content, and maybe between the paragraph and the title we can have an image with a source, and I guess I'm gonna look for Rickroll, and we're gonna get this nice picture. And don't tell anybody, but you can right click any picture on the web and you can copy image address and you can just paste it. I'm gonna close the image to avoid this huge URL you'll see. It's actually not that long, but anyway, thank you. Today I found out I didn't intend to steal that. It's just for demo purposes. So at this point we have our component, and you see the title, you see our amazing Recastly, and the content. And this is something that we could be doing for more than one article. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we can introduce what are called properties. So something I can do in the article here, which is, at the end of the day, the article is just a function that does something, and it returns a bunch of HTML and JavaScript, and as you can see, the HTML and JavaScript gets rendered. So something that I could do, and the image is really big, so I'm gonna apply a change. I'm gonna go in app.css, and I'll set image to have a max width of 100 pixels, just to avoid having this huge Recastly. Anyway, so we can receive a property here. So just like you would have the image here, the image as a property of src, you can actually pass a property to the article, for example called title, and we could say never going to give you up. And now, honestly, nothing will change. But if I type props here, I can actually do console.log props and then copy this name and paste it here. And if I open the console, I can see that I will receive a property, or basically an object with a key of title and then a value of never going to give you up. So if I type, instead of props, I type curly braces title, that means get me the object props, and from the object props, just get me the key called title. I can actually print out just the title, and that way I'm gonna have the title here called never going to give you up. And so if I put on line 7, I put curly braces and title, now I'm actually gonna be showing the title that I want. So the same thing can be done for the content, and the same can be done for the image. Obviously, as of now, there's not going to be anything, but what I can do here is I can replace the content with curly braces content, and you'll see that basically we lose the content. That's because I need to go in app.js and I need to type content equal to the content of the article. And so now we have the content, and then I can also have the src. I'll call it image, so we can say src. So I'll actually copy the src, I'll go in the article, and since the article will become too long if I add another property, I'll actually put each property on a separate line and the closing tag on a line with the opening tag on a new line as well. And then here I'll type image equals to double quotes, and then I'll paste in the text. And now I'll go in article.js, get the image, and set the src to equal to curly braces image. And now we actually have the same result of having a component that shows the article, but now this article component can be reused. So what you could do in app.js is you can create a list up here on line 6 called const articles is equal to square bracket, and then you can have a list of objects. The first one will be title, and the title could be again, let's just copy these. We can put the same title that we used there. Then we're gonna have the key called content. So since I know I'm gonna go on a new line, I may as well just do it now. I'll type content, double quotes, and a colon on the left of after each name of each key, and then the value is going to be equal to this. And so what I can do when I do this, I can actually use this variable called articles. I can go down here and type articles.map, and I will receive an article object, round bracket because I'm going to return immediately. And what I will return is I will return an article, and the values that I receive are going to be equal to article.title, and then article.content, and then article.image. And effectively, by writing this and having this object appear, I basically have the same result. The difference though is that if I duplicate this object and I have a comma and then a duplication, I'll actually now have 3 articles. So the beauty of what I just showed you, and let me know if you have any question, but this is something that you're going to do a lot. So in the next video we're going to do it again, and in the video after we're going to do it again. This is something that we're going to do a lot of. It's the fact that we can define one component, then pass different values through properties, and that we can render them. So effectively the component acts as the design for an article, and then the act of mapping, article.map, allows us to generate more components. And what you'll see in the next set of videos, the ones related to building a countdown timer, is that in the timer we are able to have a different set of values that dynamically change, and the fact that we printed them out separately has no influence on that. So if that sounds interesting, if you want to basically build a countdown builder in which you have as many timers as you want, then check out the next set of videos. This next project will allow you to build as many countdown clocks as you want. Each of them is going to be independent, and you're going to be able to also create as many clocks as you want. And so this is going to be the most complicated in terms of functional level, but it's going to be very satisfying, and we're going to be using a lot of React superpowers. So get ready to learn. Installing, I can cd into it, cd timer app, and then I'll type npm start. And if you're already running the application online on localhost 3000, you're going to get this message which says, do you want to run the port on a different port? And you can press yes and then enter, and it will open the application on localhost 3001. So again, Create React App is amazing. Next up, let's just open Visual Studio Code. I'll press Command O, you can press Control O if you're on Windows, to open the other project, which is going to be in React Workspace Timer App. So essentially, what is a timer? A timer is basically a set of 2 elements. So we can literally Google timer, by the way, and we're going to see a timer. For the sake of keeping it simple, we will probably not show the time going down. If you're disappointed, let me know in the comments. I'll make sure to, I'll make amend. I'll apologize publicly. But at the end of the day, a timer is basically setting a certain threshold and then doing something when the threshold is reached, which means that we need to have some sort of form or a way to capture user input to tell us how much timer they want to have, how much time, and then we need to have a way to track the time that passes. So let's get started by opening up Visual Studio, src, app.js, and I'll delete everything beside the div. I actually like the convention of having the name of the component in here. It's actually real comfortable, real useful. So, but at this point, we're actually going to do something new. Specifically, I'm going to type less than sign timer and slash and then greater than sign timer. I'm basically writing this, let's call it custom HTML tag, which is similar to something you saw in index.js with app. And what this means, it means that we're going to use a timer component, which again is just a function, we're going to see that in a second, to display the timer. If I were to write this and save, I'm going to get an exception. It's going to tell me that timer is not defined. So what I have to do is type up here import timer from /timer, uppercase T, which means import the file, the component timer from the file called timer.js. But since timer.js doesn't exist, I'm going to get another message. So next up, I'm going to right-click on src, new file, timer.js, React.js, and inside of here I'll type import React from React. That's because every time you work with a component you need to import React. And then I'll type, for now we'll just type const timer equals to an arrow function with curly braces and return open parentheses, and I'll type a div that returns class name timer, and you can pause this and see what I wrote. But basically I wrote an arrow function, which is the equivalent to writing a normal function. It's just this is cooler for the cooler kids who use the arrows. And then in here we're going to have our function body, and then on line 6 to 10 I'm going to have my return statement. And at this point I'll just write the text, this is the timer. And lastly, down here I'll type export default timer, which means that if you import this file without specifying a name for your import, or rather without specifying a destructured import or a named import, the default import is going to be this function called timer. And this function is just a function that returns some HTML, which again we call a component. So effectively, a component is a function that returns this HTML with superpowers. And you can use a component just like you would use a normal HTML tag. Just like I would type an image tag, img, and by the way I will type an src property, and this keyword will come up later, but I will type something like this to have an image. I can type something like this to have a timer component. Now the fact that this is called a timer and this is effectively used as a timer is kind of an illusion, because I could say this is not a timer, right? And that will be very disappointing. It will be very letdown, a huge letdown. You know, I can hear your heart shattering over it. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to be a trustful developer. So, but that's literally up to you. Just like calling the import timer up here is up to you. It's just a convention that makes your life easier. You don't have to do it, but I will highly recommend that you do. So at this point, that means that we don't even have to concern ourselves with the code in the app function. So I'm going to close that file, and I'm just going to open the timer file. And the next thing we need to do is figure out a way to get a certain amount of minutes or seconds from our user, and then we're going to be able to set, and then we're going to concern ourselves with setting a countdown for it. In the previous project, we used a hook called useState. That's something that we're going to use in here as well. We're going to type useState up here. And basically this is what I refer to as a named import. We're basically getting a function called useState from the React package, while React is the default import. So all the pieces will slowly come together. I think for most students, it's best not to know everything before you get started. It's best to just start practicing and building stuff. That way you can keep the engagement. But if you have any specific question that I didn't cover throughout the video, just make sure to let me know in the comments. I actually enjoy answering questions. They basically stimulate me to build more stuff. So who knows, maybe I'll actually make a video out of it, and you know, I'll actually send you a kiss or something. Especially now in the age of social distancing, I'll build an app that sends you a kiss. So that said, we got our useState. So we can basically we're going to need to have a variable. Let's just do a seconds for now, just to set it up rapidly. We're going to have const square bracket seconds, comma space set seconds is going to be equal to useState 0. So that means that our seconds in our input will be set to 0. Next up, and down here I'll put an input, and this input can have two properties. One property is called value, and I can literally type 1, 2, blah, blah, blah. And the other one will be, we're going to see it in a second, but it's going to be called onChange. But basically, if you have an input and you specify the value, you basically can set the value through JavaScript. That means that if I set the value to be equal to curly braces seconds, and then I set seconds to be equal to the value of input, just for demonstrational purposes, then what you'll see is that this input will always contain that value. Okay, so that means that this is how we get to interact with input and React. And the next thing we can do is we can have an handler called onChange. And onChange, I'm just gonna type here event, and then I'll type console.log onChange event comma space event. So basically I'm just typing a console.log statement that shows us the event. And I'm going to open the console with Command Option I, or you can do with Control Shift J, or you can just right click somewhere. And then when I change, you'll see this console. and this console.log, and specifically what I care about is event.target.value. Okay, so let's put that there. And now you'll see that this is the value that I'm being inputting. I'm inputting a new letter every time. So if I press 1, you'll see that there's a 1 or 2 or a 3 at the end of the string. So basically it tells me the updated value, which means that I can call set seconds on event, or rather I can keep that event.target of value, which I need, and then I can pass that as a parameter to the set seconds, and that will make it so that I have my seconds, or rather my value, being changed at all times. Okay, so that's really all we're doing there. Now the next thing is we need to only accept a number for a second, so I'm going to set the input type to be equal to number, and I'm also going to initialize the value to be equal to, let's say, 60 seconds. Okay, so now we have a number here. And something we can do down here on line 6 is console.log timer.render, which is basically the name of the file, and then the method, which is render, but we'll cover that. But basically I'm just saying a log that tells me when this line is running, and then I'll put the seconds up here so I can see the name of the variable, and lastly the value of the variable here. And if you do this console.log, if you follow this console.log philosophy, you will always know what you're doing, because now we have 60 seconds. I'll change it, and it goes to 66, 69, etc. And as you can see, it changes from an integer to a string. So I need to be aware of that whenever I do my math, and I'll set it to a string as well here, because now I know that even though this is of type number, it will change my my seconds to be a string, so I need to keep that in mind. But at this point, we basically allow our customer or our visitor to set up how many seconds they want to have. Clearly you can polish this up, but let's just do seconds just for the sake of getting it done. And the next thing we have to do is that when they confirm, when they press a button, then we're going to start a countdown. The next thing we have to do is we need to have a button that will start our countdown. So let's start by having a button down here, and I'm going to make it so that this button will say start countdown, and on click, this button will have an on-click property that will do something. Specifically, up here we can set is countdown running, comma set is countdown running, and we can set that equal to useState false, which means that we're gonna save a variable which starts with the value false. And whenever the countdown running is set to true, we're gonna also disable this input. So that means that if his countdown running is disabled, or rather it's true, then we're not going to be able to work with our let me just comment this out for a sec. Basically, if his countdown running is true, then the input will be disabled, so that means that you can't interact with it. The next thing down here will be that on click for the button, we're going to set is countdown running to true. So now, whenever we click, so the first time we can set this to false, and so you can interact with it, but then when you click, you no longer can interact with the countdown. The next thing we have to do is we have to listen to this change, to the countdown is running, and whenever that changes, we're going to have what is called a timeout that after every second will update our clock by setting it down, reducing the counter by 1. So let's do that. To animate the change of seconds, we're going to need to use another hook called useEffect. And useEffect is typically used for one-off functions, and the usage in here will be a little more nuanced. So specifically, we're going to have a useEffect, and useEffect will have a function as the first parameter, but as the second parameter we'll have an array, which are the dependencies. And specifically, the dependencies we need are going to be is countdown running, so whether we need to have the countdown or not, and whether the seconds have changed. What we can do here is we can set that if is countdown running and the seconds are greater than 0, and we need to parse int the seconds. So I guess I'll just do const seconds left equal to parse int of seconds. So that way I don't have to retype parse int every time. Boom. So if we have seconds left, then we can set a timeout, set timeout, which is going to take another function, and this function will set seconds to be equal to seconds left minus 1. So basically we're updating that. And then this one will have will happen every 1000 milliseconds. On the other end, if we're done, so if the countdown is not running or the seconds left are less than 0, then we can set that the set countdown running will be set to false. So let's see what happens here. Let's open up Google Chrome and run it with 10 seconds left. And we get 9, we get 8, we get 7, we get 6, we get 5, and whenever it gets to 0, we expect it to stop being disabled and to allow us to edit the field again. Okay, so that's what happens, and so this is basically all we got. The last thing we can do here in the else statement would be to have an alert to say the countdown is over. So let's see if that works. You see that it actually also runs the first time, so that's kind of something that we may want to change. But basically, let's see, boom, boom, boom. Okay, so you see that it's a little bit buggy, it has a little bit of lack of polish. That's because we would want to have another variable telling us whether we should alert. So we can say should alert, comma set should alert is going to be equal to useState and false. And then whenever we alert, so only if should alert, then we're going to alert here. And we're going to set should alert to false. Whenever we start, which is going to be here, we can set the countdown is running, and then we can also set should alert to true. So that means that whenever we run the application the first time, we don't have to alert. Boom, we have 2 seconds left. Now we have to alert. It's going to alert us, and it's going to reset the application. And now you basically built a countdown timer in which you can specify the seconds, and it's going to count down for you. So the incredible beauty of working with React is that this took us a few minutes, but now you can actually reuse this component as many times as you want. So I can open up my file explorer and go to app.js, and I can duplicate my timer. You can duplicate by pressing Command-Shift down, or you can just triple click the line and then Command-V to paste. And now I have 4 timers, and I'm going to be able to display 4 timers. So each timer, let's say I put it to 120, and then this one I put it to 90, this one I put it to 30, this one I put it to 10. Each timer will actually be working independently. So each timer is going to live of its own life, which is very useful because in a second we were able to turn an application with 1 timer with an application with multiple timers. So something we could do in order to show a different aspect to each timer is to show a different name. And the way we can do that is by using what are called props. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh to avoid having too much stuff. And then I'm going to add a property to the timer function or to the timer component called name. And name will be equal to a set of strings, a double quotes. And inside of it, I'll call it, for example, this is going to be my timer for workout. Then I'm going to have a timer for my chicken. And I'm going to have a timer for meditation. And I think I'm good with 3 timers. I'll save and nothing will happen. That's completely fine. That's because we haven't updated the timer to allow us to receive these properties. So something we can do here is we can close this method by clicking on the triangle so we don't see, we're not focused on these extra abstractions. But then we see this name property and we can just pass it here. We can literally put curly braces name, and we're basically saying get whatever object this timer function receives and give me the key called name. And then I can put name here, so I can type this is curly braces name, and now you're gonna see the name in the code. So with basically zero work, we were able to go from having 1 timer to having more timers, and now we can also show a different set of text. So the next thing we could do would be to allow our visitor to add as many timers as they want. So let's do that. So in the previous video we added the props. Now let's go ahead and make it so that you can actually print as many timers as you want. So the first realization is that we can use the .map method to print out as many timers as we want. So something I can do up here on line 6 will be to write const timer names and set it to be equal to an array with a name, for example workout. The second name will be chicken, and the second name will be meditation. And then I can delete these, and then I can type curly braces timer name dot map open parentheses timer arrow open parens, and in here I can type timer, and I'll type name equals to curly braces timer. And this code that I wrote, which I'm going to go over in a second, will basically refactor. It's basically a refactoring of our application that makes it so that we can specify the names up here, and they're going to be printed out there. So what we effectively did is we used an array, which is basically a list, in this case a list of names, and then for each of these names, which will be here, so I can type name instead of timer, just for the sake of making clear what this is, or I guess I call it timer name to avoid a clash between the name of the variable and the name of the property. Okay, I guess this is timer names then, just again trying to make it simpler that I can. And basically we have our timer. For each of these timer names in the list, for each of them, we're gonna do an operation, and we're gonna return a timer element. So effectively what we're doing is we're creating a const timer list, which is gonna be equal to literally a list of timers in which the name is literally equal to the value. And we're doing this, we're literally doing this. And if we were to print out timer list, so if here I print out timer list, you would actually get the same result. But normally you would never do that, because you wouldn't just declare an array of JSX elements, even though it works. I wanted you to see that it actually works. What you would normally do is from some data that your customer gives you, your designer gives you, or you yourself provide, then you will generate some JSX, just like I showed you a few moments before. So like this, timer names dot map, timer name, timer, boom. And specifically the map operation returns a array. So the simplest way to explain how the map works, which is kind of a prerequisite, but whatever. So we can do 1, 2, 3 dot map, and we'll have a number, and we can return the number plus 1, and basically we will get back a list with 2, 3, 4. So from a list of 3 elements, we get back another list of 3 elements, but for each element we do something. In this case, we just increase by 1. In the case here on the left, we return a JSX element. So why is this so powerful? That's because if we have a list of elements in our app, we basically can create a, let's call it meta level form that allows to create as many timer components as we need. And since each timer component is independent, we can actually build them and make them run, and in a way scaling from having 1 timer to having hundreds of timers is just going to take a few minutes, as you'll see in the next video. In this video we're going to be customizing the app so that instead of having a set list of timer names, we'll actually be printing them out from our states. So what we can do up here, and we're using the app.js component, we can technically create another component, and I think it will be propedeutic, so let's do that. Propedeutic just means that it teaches you better, by the way. Okay, so I'm gonna refresh so that no countdown is working. I'm gonna open the thingy right here, and we're gonna use a new component. So this one I'll cut it out in a second, but basically I'll create a timer manager class or component, timer manager component, and I'll import timer manager from /timer manager. It's actually a good idea to create a subfolder. I'll call it components / and I'll put the timer and the timer manager in there. So I'll right click on src, new folder, components, and then I'll put the timer into the components folder, and then new file, timer manager.js. Okay, so next up we can cut this out and put it in the timer manager. We're gonna get to that in a second, and then we remove the timer import from the app.js because we only have the timer manager. So I'll cut out the timer names as well, And basically this timer manager file will not compile, so you should have a bunch of errors. Specifically, you should have that you need React and the timer is not defined. Timer, we're gonna import both. So we're gonna import React from React, and then we're gonna import, look at the folder here. This is gonna be same folder, different file called timer. So import timer from /timer. Okay, and then we're gonna define our function. So we can type const timer manager equal to open parentheses, curly braces, return, round parens, and then we're gonna have a return statement which we'll define in a second. But for now, I'll just type a div with the text. Actually, let's just do timer names.map. So we have the timer names. Boom, and then let's have a export default time manager. So effectively, I just copied the code that I had from the app.js to the timer manager, and effectively I have the same result. So if I change this text here to ASD, very famous Italian gibberish, if you play World of Warcraft you know that, and there you go. So it changes dynamically, as you can see. Next up, we need to actually make it so that the timer name is a dynamic variable. So we're going to import useState, curly braces, useState, and then we'll say const square bracket timer names comma set timer names. Timer names set timer names is going to be equal to useState, and we'll just put a list with these 3 elements in here, so that effectively the file will look the same, or rather the render will look the same as before. The difference is that now we're doing it through the set or the useState React methods. So the next thing we can do is up here we can create an input with a value, and for now I'll just set a random value of new name, and then I can have a form. I'm gonna have a form and a button, so I'll wrap this thing around a form, and I'll put the input and the button inside of the form, so we can use the onSubmit handler, which is the best handler when you're working with forms. And then the button will have a text that says add new timer, and then the form will say onSubmit equal to a function which will set timer name, and that's gonna be equal to a copy. Okay, this is gonna be a little messy, so I want to avoid doing that. So I'll just rewrite this as a normal function. So basically, we need to create an array in which we're going to add a new entry. So for the first thing we need to do is we need to get a copy of timer names. So we can say const copy of timer names is going to be equal to square bracket dot 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 timer names. This is called the spread syntax. It basically gives you a clone of a list. And then on the clone of the list, we're going to push a new element, which is going to have the name of the value of this form. So we're gonna put new name for now, which is just gonna be a string. And then down here we're simply gonna set timer name, so with a plural s, and we're gonna put the copy of timer names in the set timer names. So basically we get a copy, we push the new element, and then we update through the function. So see what happens here is that every time you click, it actually refreshes the page, funnily enough, and that's because an event on submit will update the page. As you can see here, there's a query parameter up here. Basically, we're going to receive the event here, and then we can call event.preventDefault, and this is something that if you ever work with JavaScript, you're going to do a lot. So this is something we're going to have to do a lot, and basically it prevents from refreshing the page, and now we can create as many new name timers as we want. So the last aspect that we have to deal with is allowing you to change the input value. So we're going to use another useState, const timer, let's just call it name comma set name, and uppercase N is going to be equal to useState of with an empty string, and then we can set the value of the input to be equal to curly braces name, and lastly down here in the push we're going to set the name, so we're going to use the same variable name in the dot push, and lastly the input will have an onChange, in which onChange is going to call a function which will receive an event parameter, and it's going to call set name of event.target.name. So this is a pretty nice setup, and now we can have a new timer called the see. Let's see. So it actually looks there's something off. We're gonna look as to what went wrong. So I'm gonna just look here and I'm going to add a console.log statement to see if the set name is being called. It is being called. So the question is, why is this not being triggered then? So let's just print out this set name function. Ah, my bad. Event.target.name I used. I was supposed to use event.target.value. Value. Okay, which is it's always event.target.value. Boom, there we go. So now we can have a new special timer name. So such a special name, and there you go, we got it there. The last polish element we can have is that once we submit up here, we can set name to be equal to an empty string so that we reset the timer. Okay, boom. So every time you add a new one, it will remove the thingy. For default, we have 60 seconds. So at this point, in less than 10 minutes, we went from having one timer to having as many timers as you need. And each of them is independent, and each of them can be managed separately. Polish we can add is that whenever we reset our timer, so when our timer goes to 0, we can make it so that the name of the timer is shown, because as of now it's not. So let's do that. Specifically, we're going to go on timer.js, and we'll have our alert method down here in the useEffect on line 10, and here we have the alert on line 18, and we can use what are called template literals, which is basically a string used with backticks, and the backtick key should be near the tilde key on your keyboard, so you can press either Option or Shift and then the tilde key, and you should get this weird backtick, which is basically a single quote that is slanted. And then we can add the countdown is over for the timer, $, curly braces, and then we can add the name property that we got here. And by doing that, whenever each timer reaches 0, it will actually show the timer. In this case, the name is names, which is a really bad name. But in this case, for the timer, chicken. So here's a little extra layer of polish. If you want an extra exercise, you should try and add a second input field and make it so that whenever you submit, you're able to create a new countdown that not only has a new name, but it also has a new default value. And the way you can do that will be by adding a new key here called, for example, time. And then you can set time here. And then you can pass time in the app.js, in the timer, you will pass time as well as the name that we already passed. So if you want to challenge yourself with some extra steps, an extra layer of polish, that's something you can do. With that said, thank you for watching, and let's see what else we can build. In this last project, we're going to take the article component that we built in the previous project, and this time we're going to actually populate the data with a live API. So we're going to have an API we're going to be building with Strappy, which is going to take us just a few minutes, and then we're going to be fetching all of these products. And also we're going to use a React router so that we can show each of them separately. So now if you navigate to the website with a slash of the ID of the product, you will actually see only the specific article that you want to see. So get ready, because you basically are going to build your first blog. For this next project, in which we're going to be building a real blog, I'm going to have you open 2 terminal windows in your workspace. On the left, I'm going to have you type npx create-react-app in the blog-frontend. This is going to be your React frontend. And then on the right, I'm gonna have you type npx create-strapi app, and this is something different. And then the name will be blog-backend, and then -- quick start, which means that it's gonna set itself up. This will basically build by itself and then run an administration panel in http://localhost:1337, while React will run on localhost:3000. So I'll see you after the install. Is done building, it will automatically open its admin panel on localhost 1337, and we can just cd into blog frontend and then npm start to run our Strappy, or rather our React frontend. So the first thing I want to do is I want to migrate and get back that article component that we had in the React files. So let's open up code. And I think I already opened both projects, but basically here on the right I'm going to have semi-blog. Basically you can open a new window with Command-Shift-N and then press Command-O to open a new folder, and you want to open your semi-blog to get back the previous project. And then on the left you want to open your blog frontend. So now they have my semi-blog. I can get the article component. I can literally right-click on it here and copy it, and then I can go in SRC and just right-click, and then I can paste. So this way I have my article component. I'll also go in app.js, and I can copy the usage of one article component by copying from line 28 to 32, open up app.js, and then paste that in. So I have article, and I shift tab to the indent, so it looks nice. And then I can import at the top here article from /article. So at this point I have the article. This will break because article is undefined. So what I can do is I can copy one of them, this object from line 17 to 21, and I can declare it as an article here. Const article equal to boom, curly braces, blah blah blah. And this way I have access to the article component and I can show it. So if I go here, I can see the article component. The image looks too big, so I'll go in app.css and type emg max-width 100 pixels. So at this point it's smaller. So at this point we're done with the setup for React. Let's go ahead and set up Strappy. We see this welcome message, so I'm gonna put a random username or something that I can remember, but doesn't have to be anything specific because we use quick start, so it means that all the data is saved locally. And now I registered. I'll go in content types builder and click on create new collection types, and I'll create a new article collection, and the article will have a text. So let's look back. We have title, so we have a short text of name title. Then I click on another field. Then I'll have a rich text for content, and then I'll have a media, single media image for my article. So at this point I have that, and I can save. And this will basically restart the server here, and it basically will generate my API. It basically will generate the API for you. So I'll go in articles, and I'll create the first article called the first article. The first article content, and then I'll select an image, and that way I have my first article done. And then I'll create a second one called the second article, and I'll have the second article content, and I'll add a new image, which is the thumbnail of a course, of a new video you can take on YouTube if you want to learn even more about Strappy, something that I teach. So at this point we can try out the endpoint. So basically I go in roles and permissions, click on public, and you'll see the article name down here. And basically I can make it public by clicking on find and find one and then saving. And now I can actually get these articles. So if I navigate to http://localhost:1337/articles, I will get the articles back. While if I navigate to /article/1, I will be able to get one of the articles. So now we can make the same request through JavaScript, and I'll show you that in the next video. So if we want to get this data in JavaScript, we basically can use this URL and we can make a request. So I can go in console and I can type fetch and then a string with the URL localhost 1337/articles. Then I can type .then, and this will be the response, and I can call .json on the response. And then lastly I will call another .then, and this will give me the data, and then I can show you what the data looks like. Don't worry if it's a little complicated. We're gonna do it more slower, and yeah, we're gonna do it slower and more properly when we build it in the component. But the short answer is that this is how you fetch your data. But if you were to try to fetch something from Google, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that because they may not allow you to. Okay, I'm seeing pending. Most likely they won't even answer, to be fair. So this is the reason why we set up Strappy, because it allows us to get this data and have an API done in seconds. So let's go in the next video in which we're going to actually use it to build our React side. So in the previous video I showed you a very quick preview of what we're going to do, but now we're going to actually code that in our React application. So in order to be able to make a fetch request, we need to use a special hook that allows us to do this kind of operations asynchronously, or I guess it allows us to make operations that are used for setup or that are used when we need them. And this hook is called the useEffect hook. We already used that to create a countdown for the timer, and basically the useEffect is used for kind of one-off or special operations. That's a simple way to put it. So I'm gonna get that by typing comma space curly braces useEffect from React, and then I can go here and I'm gonna basically create my articles here. So I'll type const articles comma set articles, which means that I also need the useState hook, and in that case I'm gonna use state, and I'll just have a list in which I'm gonna put the article as the first article, and then I can type up here I can type articles, which is this variable, dot map open parentheses article singular, and then arrow, and then round bracket. And now this article will no longer refer to the article up here, but it will refer to the article in here. So I guess I'll call it entry just to show you what I mean. But basically I have this local variable in the dot map, and then through the local variable I'm going to be basically mapping over all the articles, and I'm going to show them, which is something we already did 3 times at this point. And I'm seeing useState is not defined. That's because I mistyped useState up here. So that's how to type it, use uppercase S state. And now it basically looks the same. If I were to add another article, a clone of this, I would basically have 2 articles here, okay? But now we're gonna use the useEffect. So I can type useEffect, and useEffect will receive a function in here, so round brackets and then curly braces, and then it will also receive a set of dependencies. And in this case, we're gonna run useEffect only once, so that means that we're gonna have no dependencies. Additionally, we're gonna be using an asynchronous operation. So the pattern we're gonna use, it's a little weird. Basically, if we were to type async here, React will complain. It will literally tell us, don't do this. It literally tells that. So that means that we're going to define a function inside of the useEffect and then we're going to use it. So don't worry about it. But it basically means that we're going to define a function in here, which is going to call const get articles. And it's going to be an asynchronous function. So we have the keyword async, which will change how we write our asynchronous request. And it basically makes our life way easier when working with asynchronous operations. So we can type async, boom. And what we're going to do here is we're going to fetch, and I'll define const JSON is going to be equal to await fetch on http://localhost:1337/articles, and then I can type const response is equal to JSON, or excuse me, this is going to be called res, and then response is going to be equal res.json. So this way we get the response. Or I guess we can call it data, that makes more sense. Or I guess this will be the server response, to be fair, but then we parse it and then we get the data. So I guess this is the proper way. So let's call it this way. And basically we get our data, and we're gonna await also the response.json, because these are both asynchronous operations. And then with our data, we're gonna be able to get our articles. So at this point I'll just type console.log app.useEffect. and then I'll type data to see what we get. And lastly, down here after the definition, I'll just call get articles. So let's see what happens. I'm gonna open up Chrome, and we basically make the asynchronous request up to useEffect data. So basically we get the articles. So the last thing we have to do with data is we call set articles on line 21, set articles with data. And now the change we're gonna have that instead of having this data, we're gonna be loading the real articles. So you can see that the image breaks, but that's okay for now. Basically, we're now using the data or the data that comes from the Strapi collection. So if I put the React up here and the Strapi here, and then I create a new article and I call it the third, and then add more text, and lastly I select even the same picture, or I guess I'll add a new one. And I'll upload, and then what is it? Just a second. Boom, selected, finish, save, and then I'll save. And now if I refresh the React application on the left, I'm actually gonna have 3 articles. First article, second article, and third. The image is broken. We're gonna fix that by looking at how the data looks. This is because we're using the local upload from Strappy, but that's okay. Basically, we see that the image, the key image, has a bunch of properties. So we need to basically change how the image looks. And specifically, we're going to need to get the image.url, but we're going to need to also fix the URL. So I'll show you that in the next video. To debug what's going on, we could add a console.log in the article, specifically here. We could do console.log, and specifically we want to see the image. So I can type article.render because every functional component is basically just the definition of a render. And then I'll type the image name and then the value. So we can see what each article image is bringing us. And basically it's bringing this object, which is not what we want, because technically we want the image.url. Okay, so if I were to type image.url here, I will be getting close to where I want to be. The only change, the additional change we have to make is that we need to add the prefix of the URL of where the image is hosted. So we are in localhost 3000, but Strappy is in localhost 1337. So basically that's what we need to add. And the way we can do that will be by adding single quotes, the template literal, and we can type $ curly braces API_URL, and then slash. Do we need the slash? We don't. And then we're just going to type the image.url. And lastly, we can define what the API URL is up here by saying const API URL equal to http //localhost 1337. So now we got that, we got the image.url, and actually my bad, we need to surround the image.url in $ curly braces as well because it needs to be evaluated. So the API URL is a variable, image.url is another variable, they both get evaluated. Let's see what happens, let's save, let's refresh, and there you go, we now get the proper images. So as a bonus, just to show you how to navigate, I want to show you that by adding React router. So let's also do that just for the sake of making this a little more interesting. For React router, we basically will have to install an extra element or an extra package to our application. So you can see it here, it tells us how to do that. We can type npm install react router DOM. Basically, we're going to go in the terminal here on the left, the blog frontend terminal. We're going to stop the execution by pressing Ctrl+C, and then we can type npm I or npm install, they basically are the same thing, and then this name here, react-router-dom, react-router-dom. And the React router DOM basically allows us to create navigation, okay? So what we're going to do in order to work with that is that we're going to create a separate component which will basically use the functionality of the app, and then we're going to have another component called the single article component. So I'll create a components folder, then I'll create a new file called articles, or I guess all articles.js, and basically all articles.js will be the app.js. So I'm just going to copy it and I'm just going to paste it, and technically this will work, especially if we move article into the components folder, but just because it will work doesn't mean that it's good enough. So we're gonna change all articles. So basically we're gonna change app, every instance of app in here, we're gonna change it with the word all articles, because that's the new name of the component. So I can search for app, and then by pressing Ctrl F, and then I can replace it by typing all articles, and then click here, and it will basically replace all of the instances of article, or excuse me, all the instances of app with all articles. So this should be good enough. And then I can go in app, and basically I'll delete the article, I'll delete the import of article, I'll delete the useState and the useEffect. We're not gonna have any of those. And I'll delete this method. I'll also delete the map, and I'll basically just leave the class name app. That's all we're gonna have left, the class name and the function. And this will work, basically, it's not gonna change much. And then we're gonna basically install React Router. React Router uses a few tags. We can actually take a look at the documentation because I really like it. But basically, React Router, all you need to know is there's a thing called browser router, or browser router. There's a switch, there's a route, and there's a link. These are literally all the elements you need to know about. The browser router is the element that manages the history of the browser. So basically looks at where you are and it handles it. A switch is a way for you to show a certain component based on where you are. And then a route is the element that is inside of the switch to specify again which route the switch is supposed to match. And lastly, a link is a way for you to link to specific pages. And we're going to be using all of these. And I would just highly recommend you check out React Router, the documentation, because it's really good. But that said, we're going to basically have, first of all, we said we have all articles. So we have that. And if I were to restart the element after it's done installing, if I add back the all articles here, there will be no difference. So I can add back the all articles here, I can import them at the top, import all articles from /components/all articles. This will basically make it work, and then I can type, once it's done installing, I can type npm start to restart the execution of my React front end. And we expect no changes. We expect to make a request, and then we expect to show these three components. I'm seeing cannot resolve all articles.css. That's actually correct, because the all articles is not supposed to have a CSS file, so I'm just going to delete these two lines up here. I'll just delete them because they came from copying out, but we don't actually need them. So it's delete, and now we're back where we were, but our refactoring will help us massively later. So let's connect this router. We're gonna import curly braces browser router, and then we're gonna import route, or rather we need switch, and then we're gonna have route, and we're gonna import them from React-router-DOM. And then I'll use the browser router tag, I'll put it here, and then I'm gonna have a switch inside of the browser router, and I'm gonna have one route, and I already cut the component we need, but basically I'm gonna have a route here, and the route will be called, will have a path property of /, which is basically the root, and then I'll put the all articles inside of it. We can also specify a components property, but this is fine as well. And I'll set the route to have a path called exact, which means that on the / it's going to show our components, but if I go on /123, it will not. While if I remove the exact property and I save, I will still see the same components because they're going to match even if it's loosely matching. The next and last change we need to make is that by having we're going to have a second route, and this is how you build dynamic parameters. Basically you type colon and then the name of the dynamic variable you need, or the wildcard variable. And this means that on the path / with an ID, it's going to pass me that parameter. It's basically going to do the work for me. And then we're going to be able to have a new component, which we can call the single article component. And the single article component will be contained inside of this route. So we need to create it. Let's import single article from /components/single article. and single article still doesn't exist. I need to create the file. So I'll go on all components or component folder, right click, new file, single article.js, and then import React from React, and then const single article. This time I'll have a props property because I want to show you what happens, and then curly braces, and then return statement, div, and I'll just have a div with a text of single article, and let's also have a console.log of single article.render, and then the props, so we want to see what the props are, and lastly let's export default single article. Alright, so the change we can make to visit the single article component is by just navigating to a slash, for example 123, and basically we're going to navigate. So what I'm seeing is that we get no properties. So in order to change that, we're actually going to change our syntax. This syntax apparently doesn't pass the properties. So what we can do is we can type component equals to curly braces, and then paste the component name inside of the component property. And then route can be used as the self-closing component, which just means that there's no matching closing component. So I can do the same thing down here. And we could have exact here as well, or not, that's fine. But basically with exact, it will only match if we have a slash and then one element. While if we don't put exact, it will match even if we add more than one slash. So at this point we finally match the single article, and we can also see the props that we get. Specifically we get key called history, then location, and then match. And the match one will also contain a subkey called params with a subkey of ID, which is equivalent to this element right here. So if I call it to article ID, I'm going to be able to see that key in the match.params article ID. So that's how you specify your dynamic variable. And now that we have the dynamic variable, we can basically fetch the article. So let's do that. Our single article component, basically I'm going to import again the article component, which is basically the presentational component that shows us what an article looks like. So I can type import article from /article, and then in here we will basically show the component called article, and the article will have a name, it will have an image, and it will have a description. And I'll also put a header here that says this is the single article page. And we can also put the props.match.params. So we have it here, by the way, in the Chrome. We have props.match.params.article ID, params.article ID. So that way we can show what the ID is. And the ID will always match this URL. So it will always be 123. In this case, it will be 12, etc., etc. So at this point, our article component is showing, but we don't have the data. So let's get that data. We can type const square bracket article comma space single or set article is equal to useState, and this will have the data of an empty object. So basically there's no data. And we can get useState up here. And we also get useEffect because we're going to need it. And then we can have a useEffect method here. So useEffect, open parentheses, boom, function with no dependencies because it's gonna work only once, and then we're gonna define our method to load the article. So we can call it const get article equals async method, and then open parentheses curly braces, and then we're gonna const response equals to await fetch of, and in this case I'm gonna use backticks instead of single quotes, so that I can use a variable inside of my string. I'll type http ://localhost 1337/articles/ and then in here we'll put the ID of the article, and the variable ID is gonna be equal to props. So we can actually get it here just for convenience. So we can get the ID and set it to this, to props.match.params.article ID. Okay, so now we can show ID in here, so it's a nice refactoring, and we can also use it here. Then we can type const data equals response.json, and we need to await this as well. And basically we're just gonna set article of data. Okay, and lastly we're gonna type it, in the article here on line 23, we can type name is gonna be equal to article.name, and I'll put each on one line just for on their own line for sake of making it look better. And lastly, image is going to be equal to article.image, and again description is going to be equal to this article.description. Actually, I'm not sure if it was description. Was it content? It was content, so let's use content. Article.content. So this should be all we need. We're gonna let's see, cannot read property URL of undefined. That's because image is gonna by default have no properties, so it's gonna basically break this code. So what we can type here to avoid breaking it will be have a conditional rendering. Basically we can say article and then, so it means if the article is there, then show me the article. Otherwise, if there's no article, so not article, and then show me a paragraph that says loading. And as such, I'm gonna put null in here as the default value for article so that it will evaluate to false. And so it's gonna say loading. This will actually say loading forever because there is no such thing as an article on page with an ID of 12, but there will be an article with an ID of 1. So that one will actually load. Or I guess we hope it will. It will never load because we never call the get article. So down here on line 20, I'll type get article and I'll call it. So now it will actually load the article that we're looking for. And there you go. It does load the article. Was it content? Yeah, title. And instead of name, my bad, we need to use the name. So I'm very forgetful. I try to copy and paste as much as I can because I honestly forget stuff. Because you're not supposed to remember these names. You're just supposed to use them. But it's a common criticism for teachers to be lazy and just to copy and paste. Although I will assure you, when you work, you're supposed to copy and paste as much as you can, because otherwise you're going to make typos, and typos are worse than having a short memory. But anyway, whichever ID we use, we're now going to be able to load the proper article. The problem that we have now, or the challenge, is that we don't have a way to navigate between different pages. So let's do that in the next video. We want to add a link, and that's something we touched on when looking at the React router. A link is just a tag that you put around the text, and you specify a to property, and it will basically link to a new page. So we can use it to link from the all articles to a single article. Specifically, when we're loading our articles, we should have a new data called entry.id, and we can use that. So we can type up here, we can type a link tag, and then put the article inside of the link tag in our all articles.js. The article will go to, and then we're gonna type curly braces entry.id. And we need to import our link tag up here, so I can type import curly braces link from React router DOM. And since this is an absolute import, I like to put them above the relative imports, because this is a relative imports in the project. That's why I'm doing that. And now each article will actually be linking, so it will be basically a block like this that links to the single article page. Actually, it looks like it doesn't work. Let's see why. Maybe there is no such thing as entry.id. Fortunately, we have a console.log here, so we can just search for this. Boom, console.log. Boom. We do have an ID. So I guess my mistake was that we can't just link to entry ID because it means nothing. We have to link to /entry ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to use backticks and then type a slash and then $ curly braces entry.id. So now the URL will be a proper URL, and as such it will actually work. There you go. Now, as a nice addition, we can also add a back button in here. So let's do that. Let's go in the single article. I'm going to import the link as well. So import curly braces link from React router DOM, and then we can have a link, and I can type a link in here. I'll type it next to the single article page, and I'll type link, and then in here I'll type back, and the link will be to slash, so that it goes back to the home page. So now we have back, boom, first page, back, boom. And you notice that every time you navigate, this loads again. That's because we have to basically reload our data. There are other ways to avoid doing that. One of them will be using context. Another one will be to use Redux. These are more advanced topics. I do cover them in my upcoming React course. And I also teach, I have a Strapi course in case you want to work with Strappy, or you want to build static websites with Gatsby, which is something that is on the up and up. I hope you enjoyed this free course. I do private coaching if you need help with these topics or you want personalized training. I also think of, I'm thinking of running a private group coaching so that it becomes more affordable if you can't afford my hourly rate, which tends to be fairly high. But I do offer group coaching in the sense of basically a digital remote bootcamp where every week we do a couple of group coaching. If you take the group coaching, you also have access to all the courses I build and all of the courses I will ever build. You can also ask me questions daily. So it's meant to push you and to keep you and to have accountability. I also like the idea of having a group so that you can start and work with somebody else that is going through the same struggle so that you can have somebody to relate to. And hopefully that can help you if you can't afford my one-on-one rates, which, I mean, if you want a one-on-one session, you can meet me on Code Mentor and you can find me there. That said, you can take my courses. Thank you very much for working with me. Make sure to send me any question because your questions are vital to me. I'm very happy to answer them, and I may actually make a video covering them. Just to recap the entirety of what we did, we basically built 4 projects. Which I'm very proud for you. I hope you're proud as well, because we ended up, where is it, React Workspace? We ended up making a blog, we ended up using components that we can reuse, we ended up making a timer, which I think is a fairly nice thing. You can literally publish that after you polish it up a little bit, and basically you got an app. And we also made a quote machine. Let me know what other topics you would want to cover. Make sure to let me know if you're interested in the upcoming React course. It's going to be extremely project-based because I think that's what you like. If you don't, if you want more theory, make sure to let me know. I love answering questions. Again, thank you very much for watching and have an amazing day.